Well, it's Tuesday. Happy Tuesday. It's time for this week's video. Get ready. Well, guess what I'm going to talk about today? Jim Richards' letter. Again, there's just so many points he makes in there. A lot of topics. So today I'm going to read just some things that he said about God's law, because he's really pro God's law, even though he will say we're not under it. But if we're not under it, but we're supposed to use it, what's the difference? But he says, but God's law should be the standard whereby we determine morality, love, ethics, and all aspects of how to relate to our fellow man. If the spirit that leads us is not leading us in this direction, it is not God. It is not the Spirit of God. Every time the message of grace has come to the planet Earth, it has been hijacked by lawlessness. And then he says the Greek word for lawlessness is antinomia. First of all, it's not antinomia. It's anomia or anomia. Antinomia means against law, because anti means against. Anomia means without law. Simple without. It's without law. And so, just to correct his Greek, because antinomia is nowhere in the Bible. Especially, well, at least the New Testament. That's all I checked. I checked the New Testament. The only thing in there is anomia, but there's no antinomia. The reason he's saying anti-law, because he actually does put lawlessness and then he puts in parentheses anti-law, is because he believes grace, the message of grace, is anti-law. And specifically, Mike Williams and the Gospel Revolution is anti-law. And any grace teaching, any of this new grace teaching that he's coming against is anti-law. Now, I can tell you, we are not anti-law. The law had a purpose. As a matter of fact, it had a glory all its own. Let me tell you what Paul said about that glory. But there's going to be some things very revealing about this law. He says in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 7, he says, but if the ministration of death, written and engraven in stones, that ring a bell, was glorious, so that the children of Israel could not steadfastly behold the face of Moses for the glory of his countenance, which glory was to be done away. Was, past tense, to be done away. And he goes on to say, for if the ministration of condemnation be glory, much more doth the ministration of righteousness exceed in glory. So we're learning a few things here. Preaching of the law, the reading of Moses, the reading of the law is, number one, it's the ministration of death. It's the ministry of death. And it's also the ministry of condemnation. And it had its glory. But he also says, which glory was to be done away. And it's all past tense because it was done away. The law was done away. But it's a ministry of death and condemnation. It is not a ministry to determine morality, love, ethics, and all aspects of how to relate to our fellow man. He also says that it's to be our standard for godliness. It was never made for any of that. Paul said the law was to lead up to Christ. It was to point us to Christ. And it did its job, and now its job is done. And this lawlessness and anti-law, he is so pushing the ministration of law, the ministration of death, the ministration of condemnation. And this is what we are against. We are against this ministration. We like the law because through the law, through the Torah, through the books of Moses, we see how Jesus was prophesied. We can see Jesus in those prophecies. We use that as evidence to validate the gospel and Jesus Christ and what he did. It has that purpose, but it is not something to live by, live under, live with, live around. It's not for that. And the law was only given about 1400 years before Jesus. For thousands of years before Abraham, there was no law. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, none of them had law. They had no law. They weren't under law. The law wasn't given until 400 years after Abraham, roughly. They were without law. They were without law. And these were righteous men, because Jim is talking about how it's supposed to instruct us in righteousness. These were righteous men, and they had no instruction in righteousness. Paul says if Abraham had done the works of law, then his righteousness would have been for naught, because it was by God, through God. You can live without law and be a righteous person. And now even more so. Now even more so, because of the work of Christ. And it's supposed to instruct us in ethics and morality and everything else. Joseph had no law. He was made the ruler over all of Egypt. He ruled everything. All of his commands were law to the people. He ruled the people, but he had no law. He did not have the Old Testament law. He didn't have the law of Moses. It came hundreds of years later. But he did a good job. He saved them from a famine. He was most merciful. He was merciful and forgiving to his brothers. He was merciful with the people. This idea that we have no morality without law is a lie, and it literally is anti-Christ. It denies the work of the cross. Paul said, where there is no law, there is no transgression. We don't judge ourselves by an Old Testament law, and we don't judge others by the Old Testament law. Anyone who does is most foolish, and that's in the Bible. It's revolutionary, folks. It's really good news, and it is revolutionary. Have a revolutionary week.